church bells rang softly over the dusty plains of Arizona Territory. 1800s. The small wooden chapel stood beneath a wide blue sky, its door swinging in the desert breeze. Inside, townsfolk whispered, waiting to witness the strangest wedding Dry River had seen. The bride, Emily Grace Porter, stood trembling at the altar, her hands clutching a bouquet of wilted prairie flowers. A thin white veil covered her face. She had answered an advertisement, a mail-order bride for a widowed cowboy named Samuel Hayes. She hadn't seen his face until today, and she feared he'd recoil once he saw hers. Samuel Hayes stood tall and quiet, his weathered hat in hand. His sun-browned skin told the story of hard years, but his eyes held a calm steadiness. He'd lost his wife years ago to fever, and the silence of the ranch had become unbearable. When he wrote to Emily, he had not asked for beauty, he'd asked for honesty, loyalty, and warmth. Yet as he looked upon the veiled woman before him, he saw her trembling, shrinking from every gaze. The preacher began to speak, and Samuel could feel the weight of her fear as clearly as the heat outside. When the ceremony ended, Emily barely lifted her chin. The crowd murmured as she kept her veil drawn tight. Samuel led her outside, through the whispering guests and into the bright sun. They rode back to his ranch in silence, the hooves clopping softly, the wind tugging at her veil. She kept her face hidden, eyes downcast. Finally, near the ranch gate, he spoke in a gentle voice. "You don't have to hide from me, ma'am." Her breath hitched and she shook her head. "You'll see soon enough," she whispered. "Why I must." Her voice cracked like brittle glass. That night the desert cooled and the stars shone like silver nails hammered into the dark sky. Samuel built a fire outside, the flames dancing on his boots. Emily sat on the porch, still veiled, her fingers twisting nervously. "I'm not what you expected," she said, voice breaking. "I'm scarred, my face." After the fire, people turned away. Samuel rose slowly, his gaze steady. He walked to her, the firelight flickering between them. Then, with a gentleness that silenced the crickets, he reached for her veil. "May I?" he asked softly. Emily froze, tears falling beneath the thin white cloth. She nodded faintly. Samuel lifted the veil, his calloused hands trembling slightly. Beneath it, her face was marked, one side smooth and fair, the other marred by burn scars that twisted the skin. Her eyes shut tight, bracing for rejection. But Samuel didn't flinch. He looked at her as though seeing something sacred. "You think this makes you less beautiful?" he asked quietly. Emily couldn't speak. He brushed a lock of hair from her cheek, his touch tender. "The fire didn't take your kindness," he said. "Didn't take your heart." A tear rolled down her face, and for the first time she smiled. The days that followed were filled with silence and slow trust. Emily cooked, cleaned, and fed the horses. Samuel worked the fields, repairing fences and tending cattle. They spoke little, yet shared quiet moments. Sunsets on the porch, coffee in the mornings, laughter at the chickens' clumsy antics. Slowly, the ranch began to feel alive again. One evening, she sang while mending his shirt, her soft voice drifting like a lullaby. Samuel stopped working, listening from the doorway. The sound warmed something deep within him. He hadn't realized how much he'd missed a woman's voice in his home. But the small town of Dry River wasn't kind. When Emily went to town for supplies, whispers followed her. Children stared. One woman gasped and said, "Poor Samuel, he must be desperate." Emily's hand shook as she paid for flour, keeping her eyes low. That night she sat by the window, tears glistening. "Maybe I should go," she murmured. Samuel looked up from his chair, frowning. "You think I married you for what others see?" His voice was firm but soft. "I married you for the woman you are. Don't let cowards decide your worth." His words sank deep, steady as his gaze. Weeks turned to months, and the land began to bloom again. Wildflowers sprouted near the fence line, and laughter slowly returned to their evenings. Samuel taught Emily to ride, guiding her hands gently on the reins. "Trust the horse," he said, "and trust yourself." She smiled, sunlight catching the strands of her hair. Her confidence grew, and with it the life in her eyes. Yet beneath her calm she carried doubt, a fear that happiness could not last long in a world so cruel to those who were different. Samuel, however, made it his mission to prove otherwise. One dry afternoon, a storm gathered fast over the plains. Lightning cracked, and thunder rolled as a gust tore through the ranch. The barn roof splintered under the wind, and smoke began to rise. Lightning had struck the hayloft. Samuel ran into the flames to save the horses, coughing through the thick smoke. Emily screamed his name and rushed after him, wrapping her shawl over her mouth. Inside, fire roared. She saw him pinned beneath a fallen beam. Without hesitation, she pulled, ignoring the heat biting her skin. Together, they stumbled out as the barn collapsed behind them. Rain poured moments later, hissing against the dying fire. Emily collapsed in the mud, gasping for breath. Samuel knelt beside her, brushing soot from her face. "You saved my life," he said, voice rough. She looked at her burned hands and shook her head. "No," she whispered. "You saved mine first." He smiled through exhaustion. "Reckon we're even now." The storm passed, leaving a quiet calm. That night, under the pale moonlight, Samuel wrapped her bandaged hands and held them against his chest. "I've lost before," he said softly, "but I won't lose you." By the time spring came, word spread of their courage. The same townsfolk who once whispered began to greet Emily with respect. Children who once stared now waved. Her scars remained, but so did her light. Samuel built her a garden by the porch, rows of roses, lilies, and daisies. "Thought you might like a bit of beauty out here," he said shyly. Emily laughed, her eyes shining. "I already have that," she said, looking at him. He blushed beneath his weathered hat, his heart fuller than he ever thought possible. Years passed. The ranch flourished, and their love deepened with every sunset. One evening, they sat together on the porch, watching fireflies dance across the field. Emily leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. "Do you ever wish things were different?" she asked. Samuel took her hand. "If you mean your scars, then no. They remind me of strength, not sorrow. They remind me of the day I found someone who didn't give up." She smiled, eyes reflecting the fading sun. The wind carried the scent of wildflowers, and in that moment the world felt whole. When folks in Dry River spoke of love, they often spoke of the cowboy and the scarred bride. They said she was a woman of quiet grace, whose heart burned brighter than the fire that once scarred her. And they said he was the man who saw beauty in ashes. On lonely nights, travelers passing by swore they could still see the glow of their lantern on the porch. Two figures sitting side by side beneath the endless Wild West sky, proof that love, when true, can heal even the deepest wounds.